the U.S., where Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in the White House on Wednesday seeking a better trade deal with the United States and Mexico. Trudeau joined Trump in the Oval Office at the start of the fourth round of talks over the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which the U.S. president has threatened to scuttle if he can't negotiate a better agreement with Canada and Mexico. Let's take a look at exactly what is happening right now.
At the White House, the leaders of Canada and the U.S. have wrapped up a meeting where high on the agenda was renegotiating NAFTA. During this fourth round of trade talks, which will last until October 17th, Mr. Trump has threatened to end the treaty.
We have to protect our workers, and in all fairness, the Prime Minister wants to protect Canada and his people also. So we'll see what happens with NAFTA. But I've been opposed to NAFTA for a long time in terms of the fairness of NAFTA. I said we'll renegotiate.
For his part, Trudeau was quick to remind Trump that Canada is far from being America's problem and that its northern neighbor is its biggest customer.
The U.S. has no bigger customer than Canada. Every year, the U.S. ships more goods to Canada than it does to China, Japan, and the U.K. combined. So, good relations with Canada, a positive trade relationship, is something that directly benefits citizens right across the United States.
More than 20 years ago, then U.S. President Bill Clinton signed the NAFTA between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico into law. As a presidential candidate in 2016, Trump bashed the deal, which went into effect in 1994, as a symbol of all that's wrong with globalization. But Canada and Mexico's own positions on NAFTA suggest they'll push back hard on some of the items on the U.S. agenda. This comes amid growing alarm from business leaders at the prospect of Trump junking NAFTA in favor of bilateral deal.
So can business leaders convince Trump to keep NAFTA? To ask that question and particularly answer that question, we have our panelists joining us in Beijing once again. Professor Liu Baocheng with the University of International Business and Economics here in China, and Mr. Rick Dunham with Tsinghua University, focusing on the global business journalism program there. And we're also joined in Canada, Carlo Dade, sir, the director of the Center on Trade and Investment Policy from the Canada West Foundation. I want to welcome the three of you, starting with Mr. Dade. Is Canada likely to be able to convince the Trump administration to stay in NAFTA and continue with the planning for the future? Mr. Dade.
That's a good question. I think I and most observers looking at the situation so far would rate the chances at 50-50. This administration, which differs from all previous U.S. administrations, does not respond to a rational presentation of U.S. self-interest. We've seen this with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where the U.S. will suffer massive losses by withdrawing. So it's really difficult to predict what the Trump administration, what the president himself will do, and how he will respond to evidence and facts. I think, therefore, the chances are simply 50-50. Canada is engaged not just with Trump and the White House, but in every state capital, in every major city, in every location in the U.S. that is a trading partner with Canada. We are there, the federal government and the provincial government, and even some municipal governments on the ground making the argument to people in the U.S., in the congressional districts. The Mexicans are doing the same thing.
Right.
So we may not be able to convince Trump, but we hope that our outreach on the ground in the U.S. will have the local chambers of commerce, congressmen, mayors making the case to Trump.
Mr. Dunham, priorities for the White House at this point, what exactly is it? Is it going to coincide with some of the talking points that Mr. Dade from Canada just mentioned? Maybe there are still some common interests there.
Well, I
mean to the Trump administration, I'm not saying to the United States.
Yes, I think Mr. Dade is right. This is not a question of rationality. And the Canadian chambers of, the Canadian officials, the chambers of commerce have spoken. More than 300 have asked President Trump to continue with NAFTA, not to scuttle the deal. he's just not, he doesn't respond to traditional lobbying. The White House has denounced big business. You have a split. The Chamber of Commerce of the United States has said that no president ever has done anything that would be as damaging to the United States for trade. But this is a matter of domestic politics, and it's a matter of Donald Trump's personal honor.
What kinds of domestic politics exactly are you referring to?
I'm talking about industrial state politics. This is not the Trump base. The Trump base is rural vote. This is particularly industrial states, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, because the Trump states like Iowa and Wisconsin would be hurt by what he's doing because there would be higher duties and tariffs on farm goods and dairy products.
Right.
So this is really an interesting issue where I think Trump just wants to follow his promise, even if it is damaging to the American economy. He does not believe it is damaging, even though the business community is almost unanimous saying that it would be terrible for the economy.
But on the other hand, Mr. Dade, I mean, when you look at the NAFTA, a lot of things are still not certain at this point. It is negotiable. So how much space do you think Canada and Mexico, particularly Canada from your perspective, could create at this point for Washington to sway a bit and figure out, quote-unquote, a solution? You know, President Trump had been talking about a deal. Probably this is also one of those occasions he would like to use a threat in order to get the deal.
Correct. That's a great analysis and a great question. We have to pursue two tracks. And I think Prime Minister Trudeau mentioned this yesterday. We have to prepare, prudently prepare, not in an alarmist fashion, for the possibility that the U.S. may withdraw and the mess that will result in Washington. But we also have to prepare for the negotiations to continue. We saw this with the U.S.-Korea trade agreement, where Trump practically had the withdrawal papers on his desk ready to sign before he was talked back by U.S. agricultural interests primarily. So we have to prepare for both eventualities. In energy and in agriculture, there's room for not even compromise, but more for joint initiatives that both sides would want. U.S. agriculture needs the Canadian market. They need the Mexican market more. We need access to the U.S. market, and so do the Mexicans. So the agricultural lobbies on both sides, the larger lobbies, they're individual small interests that would disagree, but the larger lobbies on both sides are anxious that the deal is going to fall apart and are more than willing to come together. And there's a long list of things that we could do on energy and a long list of things that we could do on agriculture that industries on both sides would appreciate.
There are long lists of things that both sides could agree on and could, of course, disagree. Canada and Mexico and U.S. business leaders are against Trump's plan to adjust the origin of car components to qualify as duty-free. This is only one of those cases. Take a look at this case. This would require 85% of car parts to come from North America to avoid U.S. tariffs. It will also require 50% of car parts to be from the U.S. to qualify as duty-free in the U.S. Trump believes this will encourage car parts and electronic manufacturing jobs to move from Asia to the United States, but business leaders warn it could encourage car manufacturers to completely move overseas. So you could see, Mr. Dunham, this is not just NAFTA. It is beyond NAFTA.
That's right.
This is about Trump administration want to have all the benefits, no matter where it is from, and try to take all its business partners with it, whether it is going to be beneficial to those business partners or not.
Right. Well, this is one where it would damage Mexico significantly, which is fine with President Trump, and his goal would be to damage Asia by forcing cars to be built in North America instead of many of the parts being built in Asia now, because the percentage is 62.5. Right. He wants to make it 85% of the value. The problem is the companies could just say, forget it. We're not doing it in the U.S. at all. We'll do it in Mexico. We'll do it in Asia. We'll do it in Canada.
Right.
Who needs to do it in the U.S. And so it's a real risk what he's doing. I mean, he thinks it will pay off, but it's a gamble.
Professor Liu, you've been listening to the two other gentlemen. This is really the time for you to come in as a Chinese trade scholar. I mean, you see that a situation in which an administration wants to have the biggest benefits, despite the fact that trade unions at home and the business communities at home even disagree with what this administration was preaching. Not to mention the other parties of NAFTA, Mexico and Canada. And of course China and some of the other trading partners with the United States, because this is supposed to get away the jobs in China and bring it all to the United States. Whether that's going to happen or not, that's debatable. But Professor Liu, what do you think about this? I mean, there is very tiny little benefit for one or two states, probably not even happening. And yet, enormous amount of damage to all the rest of the world and all the rest of the economy in the United States. How should we understand this?
Well, I think a rational politician would first look at their constituency. And right now, for this case, he doesn't have a sound constituency that's there to support and eventually benefit from.
He doesn't care. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. So I think that's more of his ego. And he just believed that if I push hard, I will get below the bottom line. And also he feels that any of the U.S. purchase is a favor to any other countries instead of the equilibrium of exchange. So given that mentality, he's pushing everybody to follow his direction. And right now he identified with a spreadsheet, okay, who are my biggest trading partners? Even if, United States has been enjoying a trade surplus,
right,
with Canada, so because Canada is my biggest trading partner. So, Canada on the other side is trying to shift the attention to Mexico because, within NAFTA, Mexico has really turned around to be really enjoying the trade surplus over this deal. But now, because Mexico is too small, so that that's more or less negligible in the Obama administration.
Right.
I think next, after Canada, would be China.
This is exactly what I want to follow up with, Professor Liu, because we're going to see a lot of nasty wars going on when it comes to trade. Certainly, NAFTA already happened. We also see some political indicators. For example, U.S. disagree now with the Iran nuclear deal, the Trump administration. And today we heard about the decision to withdraw from UNESCO, one of the most important organizations, certainly within the UN family. So if the U.S. is going further toward that path, how is China going to react to that? And how is China going to prevent itself or situations from going even further downslope of two possibilities? One is to have a really nasty trade war with the United States. That's going to be a loss for everybody. Secondly is to prevent the United States from going further in that road while cooperating with the others to figure out a solution. What could be China's way?
Well, China is given at least a window opportunity to fill the gap of global leadership, particularly in business, trade and investment. And the other is that it's not really China who really, back the White House to do something, to open the trade and investment further. But, look at the U.S. consumers. They are they are voters. And look at the U.S. workers, and particularly those high-paying jobs. So, therefore, whether the United States citizens, voters, would allow him to go that far in that direction. So that's a major question.
That is a major question. On that question, I want to go to Mr. Dade very briefly before I go to our American panelists here. Mr. Dade, midterm election coming. Anyone who covers the United States knows that. It's going to be a big thing, right, next year. And now we see already politically building up toward that. Yet, we do see enormous amount of disagreement within the Republican Party between the establishment and the Trump force. So all of these actions, will they be able to get the party together, or actually Trump is going to stick to its original tactics as it did during the presidential election, and win big for the Republican Party, which for the rest of the party to remain silent no matter what he does?
I think if you want to be guaranteed to lose money, bet on what Trump will do. We as political analysts have been so wrong about Trump, especially during the last election. It's not impossible to predict what he will do, but it is extremely difficult. It looks like, though, he doesn't have much of a repertoire. He's used pretty much everything that he had in the last election. So I can't imagine, and he doesn't strike anyone as someone who learns quickly and adapts quickly. So the logical expectation would be that he would continue. But I think it's important for viewers to think that the situation in the U.S. will not suddenly get better with an election. What we saw in the election in Alabama of Roy Moore, a counter-revolutionary, a revolutionary to the revolution that's destroyed the Republican Party, won. So you have a situation where there was a revolt within the Republican Party, and now the winners are turning on each other. So the situation in the U.S. will continue, I think, to get worse, not better. Trump is not the bottom. Trump just may be an indication that we're actually heading further down.
Right.
I would just note very quickly that on Mexico, Canada has made it clear that we will not abandon Mexico in these negotiations. We will not, as the saying goes, throw Mexico under the bus. But for China, I think the change in relations with the U.S. and Canada is an opening to talk about strengthening engagement between our two countries. Canadians, for whatever reason, were hesitant to engage with China. But now that the U.S. has changed so much and the facts on the ground have changed so much, I think it's a time for a new opening for both countries to reach out to each other in a spirit of cooperation and respect as we both grapple with this new world order that Trump's bringing.
Of course, China is not here to compete with the United States, so-called with partnerships with any other country, but some countries tend to look at China as one of those alternatives for them to work with for the future. Let me come back to you, Mr. Dunham, about that. The election coming, will things get ever worse before it could stabilize? And second thing is, we see a lot of things going on in Washington, including with the K Street, which is the lobbying street.
Yes.
A lot of Trump familiar people are getting into that street and claiming they got a hotline to the president.
Right.
So business people certainly would go to them and try to ask Trump to understand the situation as well. So will those, when we say Trump administration, will those people connected to Trump eventually be able to pass the message? If not Canada, if not Mexico.
I don't think so, as long as General Kelly is there. He shut down the phone lines to the president. He's so disciplined about it. He has made it almost impossible for end runs. You have to go through him. And I think in terms of politics, Donald Trump is not looking at the 2018 election. He's looking at 2016,
That's right.
what he said in the campaign. I don't think he's worried about Republicans winning or losing. Right now, the Trump people are talking about trying to defeat Republicans more than they're talking about trying to defeat Democrats. So I think that's a battle for next year for them. Right now, Donald Trump is trying to do what he can do with executive power because he's not getting things through Congress.
Finally, very briefly from you, Professor Liu, what chance and opportunity does China have as a result? But on the other hand, is China being shouldered with more responsibility, which China shouldn't be?
Well, I think China have to move with ration versus the irrational approach by Donald Trump, and China will follow its own strategy, particularly after the 19th Party Congress. And China definitely is going to live to its own capacity, to the international commitment, and that's the Chinese culture and also the Chinese value. And China is also able to win more partners, both as neighbors to the United States and also as neighbors surrounding China, and particularly over the Belt and Road, China definitely going to present a very different but positive case.
Right. certainly AIIB, on that case, both Mexico and Canada are already some of the founding members within the organization. So it's a very interesting and encouraging sign. We want to thank the three of you, gentlemen, for being with us, Liu Baocheng, Rick Dunham, and also Carlo Dade. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.